A white police officer kicked an 8 months pregnant black woman in the stomach, in broad daylight on the sidewalk, and then walked away as if she were not human. She fell. Blood splattered among the scattered oranges. But what the officer didn't know was that someone had filmed the whole thing. And that woman, Alana Brooks, wasn't alone. The video went viral. The nation stopped to see the shockingly naked truth. Her husband, Darius Brooks, a veteran who had served his country, stopped waiting for justice. He stood up and brought the system to its knees. You'll see secrets revealed, victims who had been silent come forward, and an ending that will bring a nation to tears. This isn't just a story, it's a wake-up call. Like, comment, and subscribe to the channel today so you don't miss out on the truths they don't want you to know. There are days when the world seems to stop. Not because anything special has happened, but because everything is so peaceful. It was such an afternoon. On a tree-lined street in Wilmington, North Carolina, the sunlight was soft as honey. Pine needles rustled in the breeze, and the sky stretched out like a blanket of unblemished blue. The early summer breeze whispered through the alleys, carrying the scent of newly opened orange blossoms, the damp earth after last night's rain, and the warmth of life passing by. Alana Brooks walked slowly down the sidewalk. Each step she took was more than movement. It was hope. It was love. It was the future that was pounding inside her. She was 8 months pregnant, her round belly slowing her gait, but on her lips was a gentle smile, light as a breath of wind. One hand cradled her belly, a maternal instinct. The other held a paper bag containing a few juicy oranges she'd bought at the grocery store down the street. The scent of ripe oranges still lingered in the air. She wasn't in a hurry. There was no rush. Alana had no appointments that afternoon, no place to be but the small house where her husband worked a few blocks away. She had planned to cook Darius's favorite dinner, chicken and dumplings, using a recipe her mother-in-law had passed down. She imagined his face when he opened the door, tired from a long day of counseling veterans, but his eyes would light up at the smell of his favorite dish in the kitchen. She smiled to herself as she imagined it. In that moment, life seemed right. She, her husband, her baby, a small, simple family, needing nothing more than each other. Alana had always loved walking. For her, it was a time to think, to talk to the baby in her belly, to listen to the heartbeat of the city and of herself. The street she walked that day was a familiar one, from the library where she worked to her home. Every tile, every shop along the street, every public bench carried a comfortable familiarity, like the old palm of a loved one. But life sometimes has its own way of signaling to us that something is coming. Not clearly, not loudly, just something gently changing. A strange sound in the wind, a car driving unusually slow, a cold breeze in the middle of a summer afternoon. And then, Alana heard the sound of an engine, a low, heavy growl, like the sound of an animal stalking its prey. She didn't pay attention right away. Wilmington had patrol cars everywhere, but the car didn't just pass by. It stopped. At the corner of 4th and Walnut, the police car screeched to a halt, the tires screeching against the pavement. The slight vibration beneath her feet was like the echo of something about to fall. The door swung open so hard it hit the air. Alana froze. The man who stepped out of the car was tall, broad-shouldered, his pale skin made even more striking in the sunlight. His short-sleeved police shirt was tight against his biceps. A name tag pinned to his chest read, Huxley. Officer Ryan Huxley. Alana had never heard of him, but she had heard the stories. The stories whispered behind barbershop doors, the whispers from the mothers at church. If you have him, don't do anything strange on the street. Don't get his attention. But today she did nothing, just a pregnant wife walking home. Stop! He shouted. The voice was like a whip cracking the air, making Alana's chest tighten reflexively. Not a greeting, not a question. A command. Alana stopped, turning her head, stunned. "I'm just going home," she said softly, trying to keep her voice even. Her eyes slid over him and then down. Not challenging, not confronting. Just a woman hoping to stay safe. She had been taught this. She had heard it 1,000 times. Don't argue. Don't raise your voice. Don't look scared. Don't be a threat. But sometimes nothing helped. You look like you're wandering. Standing around aimlessly is suspicious behavior. His voice was harsh, his hand almost reaching for his gun holster. A strange feeling ran down Alana's spine. Her hand tightened around her belly, as if to give her the sense of security she no longer felt. Inside, the baby kicked. Instinctive? Or did she sense danger like her mother? "I'm not wandering," she said, her voice low. "I'm going home. Don't get smart with me," he almost growled. If there was ever a moment in your life that made you realize the vulnerability of a black woman in America, this was it. No excuses, no concessions. Her mere presence, pregnant, brown, walking alone, was enough to be suspected, to be controlled, to be attacked. And there, on that once familiar and benign street, Alana began to tremble. Not because she was weak, but because she knew. On this earth, her survival was not guaranteed simply because she was right. She stood still, but her heart was racing. And the worst was yet to come. Alana stood there, not daring to move. Not because she was stubborn or disobedient, as Officer Huxley would have written in his report. She stood still because her survival instinct told her that any movement could be an excuse for an action that could not be reversed. It was a feeling that many people had never known. The feeling of living on the edge between dignity and life, knowing full well that even breathing required caution. "I told you to stay still, didn't you hear me?" Huxley hissed, stepping toward her. Alana didn't dare take a deep breath. Her heart was pounding. Not just for herself, but for the baby in her belly. The baby she had been waiting for every day, feeling every kick, every little movement. "I'm not arguing. Please, I'm pregnant," she whispered, her words almost lost in the noise of the street. But the word please, which should have evoked some humanity, seemed to add fuel to something that was already burning in his eyes. And then it happened, a sudden, hard push. Alana was thrown back like a leaf in the wind. Her feet slipped on the rough cement, the paper bag ripped open, the oranges rolling across the pavement like a broken sheet of music. Her hands didn't reach out to catch the ground. Her hands only had time to cover her stomach. The impact wasn't loud, but the feeling inside her was like a thunderclap. Sharp, sharp. And then, silence, as if everything had frozen in the fall. "Oh my God!" a woman screamed. "She's pregnant!" came the echo, almost a plea. But Officer Huxley didn't stop. His face was red, his eyes filled with something that wasn't justice, but brutal power mistaken for responsibility. He raised his foot and kicked Alana in the stomach. Alana's scream was unlike any she'd ever heard. It wasn't a high-pitched movie scream. It wasn't a wail of someone with a physical wound. It was a mother's soul-ripping scream, a scream that would wake the city if only it would listen. She curled up on the ground, clutching her stomach, as if her body itself could fight off what had invaded her most sacred place. She couldn't speak. Her eyes were wide open, bewildered. Her body was shaking as if she'd been electrocuted. People stood there, passers-by. Some screamed, some cried, some picked up their phones. But no one came forward. No one. A trembling old woman said, "Someone call an ambulance. She's bleeding." A man whispered, "I can't believe it. In the middle of the street." But Officer Huxley turned his back. He walked away as if nothing had happened, as if she didn't exist, as if the screams were an illusion. Perhaps to him, Alana Brooks wasn't a person, just data, a suspected target, a nuisance on patrol. But with the phones recording, with the hearts shaking, what had just happened was undeniable. A police officer kicked a pregnant black woman in the stomach, in broad daylight, on the sidewalk, unintimidated, undefended, without hesitation. The ambulance arrived 10 minutes later. 10 minutes felt like a century. During that time, Alana couldn't speak, couldn't roll over. She had only one glimmer of hope that the little creature inside her was still alive. As the stretcher was lowered, the paramedics had to lift her up with the tenderness of someone trying to save 2 lives. The smell of blood, the sirens, the flashing lights, everything blended together into a panic. And in the dreamy moments before she passed out, Alana only had time to whisper a name: Darius. An hour later, Darius Brooks's phone rang. He was cleaning up his files after his last session of the day at the Veterans Center. "I'm calling from New Hanover Regional. Your wife was attacked. She's in critical condition." He didn't ask much. He just threw the phone across the seat and rushed to the car. One hand gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The other wiped away the tears that kept flowing. The last thing he saw was Alana this morning, pushing on her flats, wincing at her growing belly but smiling as he joked, "You're walking like a duckling." Now, she was in the hospital, wondering if the baby was still alive. When he arrived, his old combat boots made a cold, hurried, terrifying sound on the tiled hospital floor. A nurse pointed to room 403. He ran, almost colliding with an ambulance cart. When the door opened, his world stopped. Alana lay there. Her face was swollen, her lips torn, her eyes closed. But her chest was still rising and falling. And her belly, white bandages wrapped around it, the heart monitor beeping. The baby was still there. But they didn't know for how long. "You're here, Darius." Her voice was as thin as a breath, but it was enough to break him. "He dumped me," she said, her eyes open, but wet. "Honey, I couldn't do anything." Darius knelt down, took her cold hand, and brought it to his lips. Didn't speak. Just breathed. And in that moment, there was no longer a veteran, no longer a strong man, just a husband. A man who saw the most sacred thing in his life crushed right on the road and no one stopped. But he would not be silent. He would not bow his head, because this pain would not be forgiven. Hospitals are never truly quiet. Even when the hallways are empty, there's the rhythmic hum of machines, the gurgle of wheels, the sound of doors opening and closing, and occasionally the sigh of someone who's grown accustomed to pain. But in room 403 that night, there was a different kind of silence. Not the quiet of healing. It was the silence before the storm. Darius Brooks sat beside his wife, his hand clasped tightly in hers, though hers was still shaking slightly. His eyes never left the slow rise and fall of her belly, the child he'd never met but loved more than anything. That's where a boot had landed. A kick, a moment, and everything he'd stood for, sworn to live and die for, was trampled. He'd survived Afghanistan. He'd known pressure, silence in the midst of battle, the toughness needed to survive. But no battle had ever made him feel as invisible and helpless as the moment he saw his wife lying there, purple, motionless. The only sound left was the heartbeat. Darius didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't go crazy, not because he didn't want to, but because he had been trained to bottle up his emotions, to hold them in, like a smoldering fire. And when the time came, that fire would burn everything in its path. And that night, in the white room that smelled of antiseptic, the fire inside Darius began to flare up. He looked into his wife's eyes. Beneath the bruises and the dim light from the bedside lamp, it was still the same eyes. The woman he loved more than himself. The one who had been with him through thick and thin. The one who had sung him to sleep when the nightmares of war came in the middle of the night. "I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. Her voice was cracked like dry leaves, but still full of dignity. "I didn't say it out loud. I didn't resist. I just wanted to go home." "I know," Darius nodded. "I know." She turned away, and tears fell silently onto her pillow. "I feel humiliated," she sobbed. "Everyone just filmed. No one helped." Darius squeezed her hand, said nothing. Because if he opened his mouth, he was afraid he would scream until the world was broken. Just then his phone vibrated on the table. 1 call, then 2, then 5. Messages poured in continuously. A link was sent over and over again. Video of pregnant woman kicked by police officer goes viral. He opened the video. Pressed play. It only took 37 seconds. But those 37 seconds were undeniable evidence. No shaking, no editing. Just the bare facts. A pregnant black woman being stopped. Shoved. Kicked in the stomach. No warning. No threat. Nothing. Just her presence being considered a sin. He watched once, and again, and again. Each time he saw something new. The way Huxley glanced around, knowing someone was filming, but doing it anyway. Alana's instinctive crouch to cover her belly like a human shield, and the faces of the cameramen, not fear, not surprise, but resignation, like they'd seen this before, many times. Darius opened his contacts. His finger slid to a name he hadn't called in 3 years, Julian Wade. Old sparring buddy, now a civil rights attorney in D.C. He pressed call, 1 ring, 2 rings. Then the deep, familiar voice. "Brooks, are you okay?" Darius replied softly, almost in a whisper. "No, but I'm focused." He told her everything, every detail. Each word was a bullet, not fired outwards but aimed at the very system that had spawned the evil. Julian did not interrupt. He was silent. When Darius finished, there was only one response. "We're not going through the front door. We're going straight to the roof. You gather the witnesses. I gather the team. We start tonight." Darius turned to look at Alana. She was asleep. His hand was still on her stomach, like a promise. An oath. He leaned down, gently touched her messy hair, and whispered, "You brought us here. Now let me lead the way." And from that moment, the broken husband became a warrior, not just for his wife, not just for their child, but for all those who have never been heard, never been seen, and never received justice. There are moments in life when you know for sure that nothing will ever be the same again. For Darius Brooks, that moment did not come on the battlefield. It did not come amid the explosions and smoke of bombs as it had during his years in uniform. It came standing on the 3rd floor of New Hanover Hospital, looking down through the thick glass and seeing hundreds of people, strangers, but not taking their eyes off the building where his wife lay fighting to keep their son alive. No one shouted, no one raised their fists. They stood. They waited. They listened. And that moved him more than any loud protest he had ever witnessed, because that silence was not indifference. It was a cry without sound. It was a declaration that the pain of a black woman was no longer forgotten. The messages continued to pour into his phone like a flood. A famous TV host reposted the video of Alana being dumped, along with the caption, "What year are we in America? This isn't 1960. But why does my heart feel like it's back there?" A black priest in Atlanta wrote, "I've buried women like her. God bless me never to have to do that again." Even a federal senator wrote in a subtext, "We need to look the truth in the face and act like human beings with a conscience." For Darius, those words weren't the most touching. What almost brought him to tears was a message from Leroy, a former student of Alana's at the Children's Reading Center. "Alana taught me how to write my first sentence. Now I wish I was old enough to protect her." That morning, after 2 sleepless nights, Darius walked out of the hospital. The dim light of the new day fell like a cold knife, cutting into wounds that had not yet healed. He stepped out, not shouting slogans, not carrying banners, but his eyes, low, red, deep as the sky before a storm, made all eyes turn to him. A young girl, her eyes bright but her lips trembling slightly, stepped forward. She handed him a small microphone, connected to a simple loudspeaker set up on the stone steps. "You don't have to say anything perfect," she whispered. "Just say the truth. Everyone is ready." Darius looked around, from the old man leaning on a cane, to the veterans nodding at him with familiar eyes, mothers holding children, young men with backpacks, and people he had never met, but their eyes said, "I am here. I see you, and I believe you." He raised the microphone. He took a deep breath and began. "I'm Darius Brooks, and the woman lying on the ground in the video you saw is my wife." Silence, not a sound. Even the car horns outside had stopped. "Her name is Alana, and the baby she's carrying is our firstborn son." We're not rich, we're not powerful. We're just a young couple trying to make it in the city. She works at the library. I work at the Veterans Center. She was just walking home that day, carrying a bag of oranges, smiling to herself as she imagined what she was going to cook that night. He paused. His voice began to shake. And then, for what reason? Because she was a black woman walking alone? Because she had a big belly? Because she dared to show herself without anyone's permission? A sob rose from the crowd. A black woman, in her 50s, put her hand over her heart and shook her head. She was crying not just for Alana, but for all the people who had been Alana, who had been trampled on, but no one had filmed. No one had spoken. Darius gripped the microphone. I survived war. I imagined the worst possible scenarios for me. But never did I imagine that my wife would be kicked in the stomach while pregnant, right in the heart of the city I swore to protect. We're not asking for pity. We're not asking for special privileges. We just want the simplest thing, to be seen as human beings. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was a heartbeat restarting. 1, then 2. Then 100 hands clapped together. Not for heroism, but for the truth being spoken in the voice of a man who was in pain for love. And when a child held up a sign, Alana deserves to be protected, it was known. A movement no longer in the hands of celebrities. It began in the heart of a husband. That night, the video of Darius's speech went viral almost instantly. There was no background music, no special effects. Just one man, standing alone, speaking from his heart. And the world listened. But the strongest response didn't come from tweets or shares. It came from actions. The next morning, a crowd of strangers showed up outside the hospital, carrying food, water, plastic chairs, and hand-painted signs. We're here for Alana. We're here for Darius. And we won't leave until we get justice. A young father placed a small doll on the gate with the words, "For the baby who almost didn't get born. Every life matters." A couple of pastors from Georgia held a prayer service on the sidewalk. The singing was not mournful, but strong. A declaration of love and hope. And then something unexpected happened. The young police officers, not on Huxley's shift, began to arrive. No guns or signs. They stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, hats off, heads bowed. An officer named Jaime, a 32-year-old Latino, stepped forward and whispered to Darius, "I can't change what happened, but I can stand by you." Darius looked at him, said nothing, just nodded. Because he understood. Fighting doesn't mean going against everyone. It means standing up for what's right, even if you're in a suspect uniform. That night, when everyone was gone, Darius returned to the hospital room. Alana was awake, her eyes still tired but a little brighter. "Are you tired?" she asked, smiling. The smile was weak, but not without the gentleness he had loved for so many years. Darius just shook his head. He sat down, holding her hand like he had so many times before. "I told them," he whispered. "About you? About everything. About the truth, about the pain, and about love." Alana nodded. A tear rolled down her cheek. It was no longer a tear of fear. It was a tear of hope. "I'm proud of you," she said. Darius reached up to touch her cheek, then leaned down and whispered in her ear. "They chose the wrong person. And baby, they chose the wrong family." But the truth was, Darius knew the storm wasn't just coming from him. It was starting to backfire. Within 12 hours of the press conference, a series of fake accounts suddenly appeared on local forums, spreading rumors that Alana had aggressively confronted the police in the past, that the video had been edited to cause outrage. One account even posted an old photo of Darius, taken when he was training the army in the Middle East, with the caption, "This guy used to hold a gun? Now he wants to teach morality?" Julian slammed his fist on the table in anger. The tactic is too familiar. When they can't deny their guilt, they try to break the person who brings the truth to light. Darius wasn't angry. He was quiet, but his eyes were as deep as a hidden fire. He looked at the screen, reading each line of venomous comments, then turned to Rosa. "This is going to get worse, so if we're going to do something big, we have to do it now." Rosa nodded for once, without asking, because she understood too. The darkness wouldn't go away on its own. It had to be pulled out, exposed, to the intense light. "They picked the wrong family." Darius said it not as a threat. It was a declaration of war. Because when a husband loses the sense of security for his wife, when a father almost loses his child before he hears his first cry, he doesn't just demand justice, he becomes justice. 3 days after the attack, as Wilmington reeled from breaking news and images of protests outside the hospital, Darius walked into the makeshift office of Julian Wade, his old battle buddy, now a prominent civil rights attorney from Washington, D.C. On their desk was a laptop open to a folder containing internal documents from the Wilmington Police Department, obtained through an anonymous tip. Julian didn't say anything at first. He just pulled up a chair, pointed at the screen, and let Darius see for himself. After a few minutes of scanning the cold headlines, the room held its breath. 3 complaints, in 5 years, all against one man, Officer Huxley. 2 of them from black women. One claimed to have been pulled out of her car during a nighttime stop, for no offense. The other claimed to have been pushed to the side of the road for asking, "What was I stopped for?" Both complaints were dismissed for lack of evidence. No photos, no audio recordings, no name of the investigator in charge, Julian muttered, his voice as quiet as a stone. "Someone cleaned him up." Darius stared straight at the screen. His face didn't change, but his hands clenched. The knuckles were white. Alana wasn't the first, but she'll be the last. The next day, Julian summoned the legal team to the office of Rosa Fields, a woman with piercing eyes and a voice that never wavered in front of a camera. Rosa carefully flipped through the documents as if dissecting a rotten system. Alongside her were a team of law students and volunteers, sifting through internal emails, blurry memos. One email stood out. Subject: Huxley is not okay. I refuse to work with him. Inside was a detailed account, using excessive force, screaming at a 15-year-old boy for refusing to get off his bike, repeatedly expressing interest in stopping black people. Most frightening of all, the email was never answered. Another line silenced the room. He once said, "Black women are argumentative. I like to arrest them." Julian looked at Darius. "We're not dealing with just one cop. It's a culture of systemic tolerance." And then, the thing that stopped everyone dead in their tracks. An anonymous email arrived in Rosa's office. 5 pages of documents were attached that weren't in the official file. It was Huxley's 2021 internal review. The first page was shocking enough. Unfit for duty in the field. Tends to overreact. Particularly agitated when working with black residents. The last page was in red print. Not recommended for reappointment, but underneath was the signature of a familiar name, Assistant Chief Ray Trenton. Darius frowned. He stood on the podium at the community meeting last year and said, "There is no racism in Wilmington." Rosa nodded. "Now there is. And we have names, dates, and evidence." Darius returned to the hospital that evening. No flowers, no gifts. He handed Alana a file, more than 60 pages thick. Red-bound, handwritten in black ink. They knew, and they were silent. Alana didn't need to read it all. She turned a few pages. Tears welled up in her eyes. "You're not crazy. You're not weak. You saw. And now they'll see." Darius took her hand. "And this time no one will turn off your light." 3 days later, the first press conference was held. Rosa stepped up to the podium. Not angry, not screaming, just gently put the file down and said, "This is no longer a story of an individual. It is a story of a system of cover-ups, evasions, and silence." Then Darius stepped forward. His voice was as firm as steel. "They thought I would bow down, but I didn't. I raised the whole system so they would see the consequences of silence." Flashes flashed. Cameras captured every word. The speech was broadcast live. Within 12 hours, 3.4 million views. And from there, the storm began. But this time, Darius was in charge. The backlash came quietly, not as loudly as the previous cries for justice. It did not bring immediate violence. It began with a chill. The next afternoon, the power station in the area where the independent journalist had just published the press conference failed. The server was paralyzed. The website was down for nearly an hour. At the same time, a series of anonymous emails arrived at the law firm of Rosa Fields with vague but ominous messages. "The world will not be a better place if you people continue to stir things up. Everyone has a family. Be careful what you stir up." Rosa did not react with panic. She quietly called her own security company, upgraded the entire building, and set up a security protocol for the group. Darius was placed on the first-level target list for protection. But when asked if he wanted to step back from the media for a while, he simply replied, "If I step back, who will step up?" In the hospital, Alana listened to the news of the press conference on television. She didn't say much, but her eyes changed. It was no longer quiet hurt. It was a cold awareness that her husband was heading into a place of no return. A nurse quietly squeezed Alana's hand. "She's fighting for all of us, and he is shaking the system." That night, Darius sat alone in a small conference room at the team's temporary hotel. On the table were strategy maps, copies of files, hand-refreshed internal police department organizational charts. He pasted pictures of each person on the whiteboard. Ray Trenton, Superintendent Mark Delaney, former police chief Gerald Knorr. He wasn't taking revenge. He was painting a portrait of a corrupt system. Julian saw the almost surreal focus in Darius's eyes and said softly, "Aren't you afraid they'll strike back?" Darius smiled, not of contempt, but of someone who had seen the end and still chose to go on. "I fought in a place where there was no home to return to, so I didn't fight to survive. I fought to change." And so, as Darius closed his eyes in the old folding chair next to Alana's hospital bed, one certainty took shape. This war had gone beyond an assault. It had become a social surgery, a system that fought back with darkness. But this time, the light did not tremble. For the first 24 hours after the second press conference, an eerie feeling permeated Darius's team. It was like the sky before a storm, eerily quiet. No one was being publicly tracked. No anonymous phone calls. Social media was still flooded with hashtags like Justice for Alana, Darius Brooks, and The Silence. A video of him speaking to the police department even hit 5 million views in 2 days. Many people mistakenly thought the system had given up, that officials were looking for a quiet retreat. But not Darius. He had seen this kind of silence before, on the front lines, hours before enemy artillery fire. On the morning of Tuesday, the Wilmington police chief appeared on local television. He stood before the camera, his face as stony as glass, and began with a familiar line. "We regret what happened. An independent investigation is underway." But then he added, "We are also concerned that the spread of unverified information could affect the morale and reputation of the entire industry." Darius looked at the screen, nodded slightly. "It's starting." That afternoon, Rosa Fields' law office was visited by tax inspectors. 3 men, 2 of them wearing sunglasses, presented paperwork and asked to examine all of her financial records for 10 years. "Just a random check," they said, their eyes glued to the pages. Rosa didn't respond. She just sat up straight and said, "Get them coffee, then call the media." It didn't stop there. The Veterans Center, where Darius used to work, received an administrative audit notice from the Department of Health. They were asking for the records of every veteran who had received counseling in the past 2 years. The manager called Darius in a panic. "I don't know what's going on, Darius, but they're coming in with the questionnaire like the center is a den of criminals." Darius was silent for a few seconds. Then he said, "They're trying to cut me off from the community." Julian, checking the intercom, discovered something even more terrifying. "We're being tapped." Spyware had been installed on the computer from a phishing email sent from the Civil Rights Defense Association, an organization that had been defunct since 2019. "We have rats in the basement, and the rats are sending them all back to the nest." That night, the head doctor at the hospital where Alana was staying came to visit the room. The tall man, wearing gold-rimmed glasses, bowed slightly to Alana and said, "We recommend that you be transferred to a private medical facility with dedicated security. The reason is, security is no longer guaranteed." Darius clasped his hands. "Are you saying that my wife could be attacked in the hospital?" The doctor didn't answer. He just nodded, sadly. "We've seen this before. When a system is threatened, it fights back in the dirtiest way." That night, the group met in a hotel room that had been cleared of listening devices. For the first time, Rosa stood up in the middle of the room, her eyes blazing. "They're not just fighting us with power, but with the old network they think we don't dare touch. But that's wrong. From now on, we're not just defending. We're going to strike back." Darius stood up, slowly opening the leather briefcase he'd brought from the archives the week before. Inside were copies of documents that had been burned, that had been marked confidential. There was a faint handwriting, smudged with smoke. One document read, 2010. Report. Multiple reports of Huxley's aggression against women. Suspension recommended. At the bottom, no action required, my man. Signed, R.T. Ray Trenton. Tomorrow, Darius said. We'll publish everything. No more hiding. Rosa was silent. Julian nodded. The team set to work preparing emails for the nation's most respected investigative reporters. Exactly at 1:34 a.m., Darius's phone lit up. A message with no number, just words. Don't dig deep or you'll be buried with me. Darius looked at the screen, then chuckled. Not afraid. He turned to Alana. She was sleeping peacefully, her hand on her stomach. And he knew, if they dare dig, I'll be waiting at the bottom of the grave with a torch. The next morning, when the documents were sent out, it took just 47 minutes for Darius Brooks's name to top the national trending list. A veteran investigative journalist from ProPublica called Rosa, his voice trembling with excitement. This is the first time in 10 years that I've seen a network exposed this cleanly. Rosa didn't laugh. It wasn't clean. It was ripped apart. And we're not done yet. But not everyone on the team was calm. A young law student named Malik, who had helped Darius organize the documents, was the first to voice his opinion. Are we sure this is the right move? What if they fight back with violence? Should we wait for more solid evidence before releasing it? The room fell silent. Julian spoke up. What are we waiting for, Malik? A coffin? Darius stepped forward and put his hand on Malik's shoulder. The question you should be asking is not, what if they strike back? It's if we do nothing, how many more will be like Alana? Malik nodded, his face pale. But he did not retreat. And because of that, the group was stronger. That night, in the soft light of the hospital room, Alana took Darius's hand, asking for the first time what she had always kept hidden. If this doesn't stop, if they target you and the baby, are you willing to give up, just to keep me? Darius was silent for a long time. Then he said, No, but I'm willing to die for you. And if I give up what's right to keep you safe, I know you'll never forgive yourself. Alana smiled. Her eyes were still tired. But there was light in them. Then we'll keep going, no matter how thorny the path, as long as I hold your hand. And so after that night, the fight was no longer just about truth. It was a fight for love, for life, for legacy. And the world, for the first time, began to really listen. The morning news on major television networks began with a red headline that ran across the screen. Leaked documents expose system that hided police violence in Wilmington. Within 12 hours, the entire document released by Rosa's group had appeared in nearly 40 major newspapers, from the New York Times to The Guardian. The hashtag Justice for Alana morphed into We Are Justice, a reminder. This fight is no longer theirs alone. Prominent attorney Kendall Duvernay, who represented George Floyd's family, retweeted the file with the caption, This is one of the most blatant examples of systemic silence I've ever seen. Wilmington needs a federal audit immediately. Minutes later, a coalition of major civil rights organizations, including the ACLU, Color of Change, and the NAACP, issued a joint statement. We stand ready to provide legal assistance to all victims involved. This is no longer an isolated incident. It is a sick system that must be exposed. And then, they started to show up. People who had been silent. People who had been threatened. Who had been made to doubt themselves. The first victim was Jacqueline Mays, 52, a former elementary school teacher. She appeared on the evening news, her eyes shaking, her voice full of determination. I was pushed against a wall by Officer Huxley after asking him why he was searching my son's car. I wrote a complaint. 3 days later, I received an anonymous letter with a photo of my house taken from a distance. I've been silent since then. I'm ashamed. But now, thanks to Alana and Darius, I'm not going to be silent anymore. After Jacqueline, there was a former student, then a veteran, then a young woman who had been tortured for stepping on the wrong side of the road. Each person who spoke, and each word they said, was a hammer blow to the false wall the city had built for so long. Rosa held a town hall on Saturday night, in a large, oak-domed church that had hosted Martin Luther King more than 50 years earlier. The seats were packed. People stood in the aisles. There were old people with canes and babies in cribs. The lights were warm, but the atmosphere was tense. On stage, Rosa began, Tonight, we're not just going to recount what happened. We're going to remember it, pass it on, and turn it into a weapon. She introduced each witness, each testimony, each page of documents projected onto the large screen behind her. The crowd didn't applaud. They were silent. Tears. Because they knew, for the first time in years, the truth was being called by its name. At the end of the show, a side door at the back of the stage opened. 2 bodyguards stepped out first, then a familiar figure, Alana, still on IV, her belly full, her face pale. But when she stepped up to the microphone, the room held its breath. Her voice was as light as mist, but each word was a whirlwind. I didn't intend to be an icon. I just wanted to walk home. I just wanted to have dinner with my husband, listen to my favorite music, and feel my baby kicking inside me. But a man, with a badge on his chest, thought I didn't deserve it. I almost lost my son. But I stand here today, not because I am strong, but because I am supported by all of you. She choked up. Darius stepped forward, gently guiding her down the steps. And then, something unexpected happened. The entire room raised their hands to their hearts. No voices, no slogans, just a gesture more profound than any speech. As they passed between the rows, Darius heard a little girl whisper to her mother, "I want to grow up to protect others like him." At the end of the town hall, Darius stepped up to the podium. He carried no papers. He did not look at the camera. He just looked straight into everyone's eyes, like he had looked at his comrades before the march. "We are no longer demanding justice. We are becoming it. Every single person in this room is justice, and when justice lives in the hearts of the people, there is no system that can stop it." The next morning, Twitter was filled with a message from the mayor of Atlanta. "We are reviewing all internal records since 2010. The story from Wilmington has woken us up." In Minneapolis, people began organizing civil unrest. In San Diego, 3 police officers were suspended after old accusations were resurfaced. Internationally, The Independent ran a story headlined, "Justice is no longer a symbol. It's an action, starting with a husband named Darius Brooks." And in Wilmington, a revolution is being written, not in blood, but in truth, persistence, and the belief that change is real. That night, Darius and Alana sat together on the roof of the makeshift apartment they rented near the hospital. The night air carried the scent of wet asphalt and wild daisies from the park. Alana leaned her head against Darius's shoulder and said softly, "I never thought I would survive this. But now I think what would have been scarier was if I hadn't stood up." Darius squeezed her hand. "We stood up, and now they can't make us sit down?" In the distance, a series of lights from the windows of the residential area flickered on and off, one by one. It wasn't a familiar sight. It was a spontaneous act, people turning on their yellow lights for 5 minutes to show their solidarity with Alana and Darius. No shouts, no signs. The lights were the silent pledge of a city waking up, but no one was under any illusions. The next morning, the group received an anonymous fax. "Remember, the system may bow, but it never goes away." Rosa just smiled. "Good. Then we'll keep teaching it to bow. Every day." Fall comes to Wilmington as if the city is learning to breathe again. Leaves turn yellow, red, orange on streets that were once bloodied and heavy with silence. A cool breeze blows through the trees lining the park where Alana used to like to read, before it all began. But Wilmington is no longer the old Wilmington, and it's not quite the new Wilmington either. It's in the middle, a city in transition, between memory and promise. The Monroe Initiative's headquarters is no longer a small room on the 2nd floor. It's a 3-story building in the heart of the city. Glass walls, oak doors, wheelchair-width aisles. On the outside are large, deeply etched letters. "We are no longer silent." In just 18 months, the organization has opened 3 more branches in Atlanta, Raleigh, and Baltimore. They've supported more than 200 families, from legal support to mental health counseling, from advocacy to training teens to become community leaders. They don't promise the impossible. They listen, they believe, they walk. Alana, after months of recovery, didn't choose to rest. She returned, not as a victim, but as a storyteller so others wouldn't forget. She gave talks at medical schools, hospitals, women's groups, where she told of the moment when a doctor ignored her pleas for help because you didn't look like you were in that much pain. She told them not to elicit pity, but to challenge. "Don't tell me I'm strong. Ask me why I had to be this way to survive." People cried. People stood up. People sent emails apologizing for ever doubting. And then they began to change the way they cared for patients. Little by little. One Sunday morning, Darius held his son Justice, now almost 3, by the hand, and walked down 4th Street, the street where Alana had collapsed years earlier. Justice stopped in front of a large mural. His mother, bright-eyed, holding her pregnant belly, a heart-shaped light behind her. The boy pointed and asked, "Daddy, is that Mommy?" Darius nodded. And that was me in her belly, the day a person forgot what it meant to be human. Justice didn't understand. But the boy didn't ask anymore. He just placed his hand on the painting and kept quiet. Because there were children born, with the intuition of those who had survived the fire. But Darius knew the system wasn't dead. It had only changed its mask. Some former officials, who had been silent during the outbreak, now returned as reform experts, standing at the podium to talk about restorative justice, as if they had never signed the disclaimer. But unlike before, now people noticed. And they spoke up. When a police training program invited a former convict to teach, students walked out. When a research institute invited Huxley's former defense to speak, the nonprofit withdrew funding within an hour. The anger was no longer suppressed. It flowed into action. Healthy, upstanding, persistent. A year after the incident, the city held a memorial service for victims of police violence. The outdoor stadium was packed. The names of each victim were read aloud. A candle, a photo, a statement from a loved one. Darius was invited to speak. He stepped onto the stage, not wearing a suit. Just a white shirt, the sleeves rolled up. His voice was deep, firm, but this time gentler. "We are not here to mourn. We are here to promise that the names read today will not be swept into oblivion. I have seen the cruel system, but I have also seen the brilliant people, and I choose to believe in the latter." He did not pound his chest. He did not raise his fist. He just turned back to the front row, where Alana sat, holding little Justice. And then, as if someone had given him a gentle push, Justice stepped onto the stage. The boy walked slowly, his arms swinging, his legs shaking slightly. Darius knelt down but did not stop him. The boy stood next to his father, looking at the microphone. Then he turned to his mother. Alana nodded. Justice touched the microphone. Her voice was slurred but carried far. "My name is Justice. My mother is Alana. My father is fearless. And so am I." No one spoke. No one laughed. Everyone stood, not for ceremony, but because that sentence marked the end of a chapter. Not to close it, but to open a new one. Wilmington was no longer silent, no longer kneeling before threats, no longer waiting for someone else to save it. And it all began with a husband, with a wife, with a child named Justice. The ceremony did not end with the national anthem. It ended with silence. A full 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Symbolic time. A time of pain. A time of awakening. In that silence, Darius closed his eyes. Not to pray, but to remember. He remembered Alana's hands, purple in the ambulance. He remembered the doctor's eyes, fearful but afraid to tell the truth. He remembered every threatening text message, every sarcastic smile from the powerful. But then he remembered something else. His son's eyes. Clear, full of questions. Unanswered. And he thought to himself, he will grow up fearless, because Mom and Dad went first, and paved the way with the truth. When Darius opened his eyes, the stadium was still standing. A community, a living memory, a vow. Never return to the days of silence. You just witnessed something that should never have happened. A black woman, pregnant, was kicked in the stomach by a police officer. Not because she committed a crime, not because she was a threat, just because she was in the wrong place, with a skin color they deemed suspicious. Even more frightening, no one stepped forward to help. Not a single bystander, not a single co-worker spoke up. Just phones silently recording. And then silence. Without that video, without that husband, without the outpouring of anger from the community, would we ever know what happened? And if we knew, would we do anything about it? That's a question for all of us. Because racism, systemic violence, and complicit silence, it's not just happening in Wilmington. It could be happening in your city, your school, right outside your door. The lesson here is not just to speak up. It's to learn to look deeply, clearly. Learn to recognize injustice when it's not directed at you. And most importantly, learn to not turn away. Because tomorrow the person lying on the sidewalk could be you, your loved one, your child. Alana and Darius's story doesn't just move us. It makes us angry, and that anger must lead to change. Justice doesn't come from boardrooms. It begins in the hearts of people who refuse to be silenced. And today's child, Justice, was born amid injustice. But she grew with love, determination, and a movement behind her. If you believe that justice should be more than a slogan, like Alana and Darius, to support them, leave a comment if you've seen or been a victim of discrimination, so this community knows you're not alone. And subscribe now, so you don't miss the stories that really matter, the ones they don't want you to hear, but you need to hear. Because sometimes all it takes is one person standing up to make the world listen. And today, that person could be you.